Hey guys, Tim Moen here. Welcome to the Tim Moen Show, episode number 1. I'm glad you joined us. Listen, this is the launch of a big new project for me. I plan on putting out a lot of content. I'm now post-politician. I left the Libertarian Party as leader about a year and a half ago, and I've just been working overtime and paying bills and buying a new house and kind of getting settled into a normal life again, and trying to build back that retirement savings that I blew trying to become prime minister. But I've been really missing being out there connecting and communicating with you guys. And so this has been a long time coming. I launched this new show. I started a locals account. Please join me at locals.com. Where just search for Tim Moen and you'll find my page and you can engage with me. We can do live streaming together. You can get involved in all sorts of ways. I'm going to be tackling all the news stories of the week. You're going to have your share of outrage porn because your boy here likes to get outraged at stuff sometimes. I'm going to try to keep that to a minimum though, because you know what? This show, I think what's really needed out there is constructive dialogue with people that we disagree with, where we respect each other, where we try to find some common ground, where we maybe try to persuade each other, where we're willing to be open to hear the other person's point of view. That's what I want to do on the show. I want to bring on people that I might not always agree with, that we might have radically different worldviews, and see if we can have a constructive conversation, because I think that's really what's missing in the world today. We have, people becoming more and more divided into their camps. And a lot of that we can blame on the government, and we'll probably be talking a lot about that on the show. But you know what? While the government might be the cause of this, ultimately it comes down to our own personal responsibility to solve the problem, because we're the ones that are living in our own skin. And if we accept that government is going to do what government does, and the news media is going to do what news media does, which is divide and conquer, well, we have to find a way to make ourselves immune from that. So that's kind of the spirit of the show. I want to have these constructive conversations. Now, this show wouldn't be taking off right now if it weren't for my men's group. I actually started a men's group about a month ago. There's a group of about half a dozen guys. We meet weekly. We talk about our goals. We talk about how to be better husbands, better fathers, better entrepreneurs, better community members, better at our careers. Whatever is on our minds, we hold ourselves accountable to each other. We inspire each other. We motivate each other. And so I've been crushing goals and making more forward progress where I want to be in the last month than I have in the previous year, where, like I said, I've just been kind of keeping my head down, working overtime. And so for this first episode, I wanted to bring on a guy from my men's group who actually helped me, motivated me, I guess, to get this off the ground, and said, you just gotta do it. You got to get it going. And, one of the things I'm always, I guess, kind of hypersensitive or self-conscious about is just ranting on the mic by myself, just kind of like what I'm doing now. If I felt like I always feel like I sound stupid, or like, I wish I could say that again, or something like that. It always feels a little bit easier with someone else. And so I've kind of been procrastinating getting this thing off the ground. But my buddy John in this men's group said, you know what, I'll come on your podcast, even though I've never done a podcast before, even though I'm not comfortable out there in the public spotlight. I'll come on, I'll be your huckleberry, so to speak. And, you can bounce things off me and I'll get you going. Now, John also happens to be in my men's group because I invited him for a very specific reason. He's a coworker of mine. Whenever we work together, we go into 2 or 3 hour long debates about, you name the subject. We just love to debate each other. And sometimes halfway through our debate, we'll switch sides. I'll take his side, he'll take my side, and we'll try to argue better than the other person argued for their own position. We just love debating so much. So I brought him into my men's group because I wanted him to challenge me. And I wanted, I don't want just Kool-Aid drinkers in there. I want people who challenge my assumptions, and just like I'm going to challenge theirs. And that's why I wanted him on the show today. And I thought it'd be great today. All right, here he is. Now, he doesn't have a camera. Like I said, he's new to podcasting, but we're going to bring him in. All you out there in audio land, you won't notice. On YouTube, you won't get to see his gorgeous face. But John, welcome to the Tim Moen Show. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, Tim. Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks for the bit of an introduction there. And who knows, maybe I evolved to the point of being a little more comfortable and throwing the camera on. But you know what? For now, this is a great place to start. And, I can't wait to sharpen my sword and to get in some battles, some verbal battles with you.
Yeah. Well, the good thing about not having your camera on is that, you'll be able to go to the grocery store and the movie theater tomorrow, and you won't be molested by women or adoring fans. So that's one good thing.
Yeah, not a problem up till now, but when this podcast takes off, it'll definitely be an issue, I'm sure.
Definitely will be. We got big plans here, big goals. Oh, by the way, audience, if you want to get more involved in the conversation, head on over to locals.com. That's Dave Rubin's. Then I just started a page over there. Just search for Tim Moen. I think it's Tim Moen Talks or something like that. I'm going to be posting extra videos, getting you involved in conversations. I plan on being a prolific content producer, and I have some very strong opinions, and I'm sure you'll want to challenge me on them, and I hope you do. So head on over to Locals. That's the best place you can go to challenge me. And hey, if you like what I'm doing here, if you like the ideas I'm putting out there, the vibe I'm putting out there, consider buying me a cup of coffee a month. For $5 a month. You can get involved in the conversation, and your boy here would really appreciate that. All right. Now you'll notice that under John F's headline is that he's a normie and I'm a fringe extremist. Now, these are tongue in cheek. I don't really like these labels very much. Quite often they're done kind of derogatory, but this is, I'm trying to get clicks here, right, John? I'm trying to draw people to my social media. So if they see fringe extremist versus normie, I think that'll get people in.
And honestly, sometimes I self-identify as that, Tim. When we go into our rants, sometimes, especially in the media nowadays, we always talk about the extreme lefts and the extreme rights. And I, personally, I identify as being pretty close to the center or being pretty normal. And I like to see the views on both sides of things. So, yeah,
well, here's the thing. Those of us in the political realm, let's say, where we're politically active, political activists, we actually live in kind of not reality, right? We live in these bubbles of, I don't want to say delusion, that's a little strong, but it's not reality. Like when I go to work at the fire station, I'm surrounded by normal people, and it's kind of refreshing. It's kind of a load off not to have different conspiracy things going on and wokeness and all this stuff. Most of the people that walk around in my day-to-day life, they're almost oblivious to all the world that I inhabit on social media, and that the world that a lot of my listeners inhabit on social media. And so, I think it's definitely not derogatory to be a normie. So the thing that appeals to me here, or that I think you do so well, John, is you are really good at arguing for, I guess, almost the status quo. Like, most people kind of just go along to get along. They just kind of shrug. They haven't really necessarily thought about why things are the way they are that much, or how institutions came to be, or, they wouldn't have the first idea how to defend an institution, let alone criticize an institution, other than to say, AHS sucks and they need to fix it. But they couldn't point necessarily to the underlying structural problems or something like that. So people are really good at criticizing maybe the things that affect their lives directly. But I've never heard anyone argue for the status quo better than you have, I would say. And that's not trying to be derogatory or critical or anything like that. It's just that you bring up a lot of really good points that cause your boy here to have to think to defend. So, yeah,
I appreciate that. I mean, honestly, I'll just, I'll say one thing to that. It's not even that I'm always arguing for the status quo. It's just that sometimes I hear, views that are really polarized to what we're currently doing, and we make it sound like we need to just blow up the current system and start over.
Right.
And I like to try and think about, but there's been like a lot of intention of how we've gotten to where we have. And I often will agree, and this is where a lot of times we agree on things. We can say that it's not a perfect system.
Right.
But then, I'd like to argue that, through Adam Smith's methods of bringing in capitalism and, our society has evolved with a legal system. Sometimes I just like to remember that, although it's not perfect, it's still pretty darn good.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, this is kind of the Petersonian view, or maybe even like the traditional conservative view, right? Which is that we shouldn't throw out institutions without understanding them or the purpose for why they were created in the first place. That's kind of the conservative traditional thing, that it's like, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. And so the challenge for guys like me who have done a lot of thinking, and kind of reading about different political philosophies and why things came to be, and have thought very deeply about the structural issues that are facing us, is okay, if we're ever going to make incremental change in the direction I'd like, which would be more limited government, I'm going to have to convince guys like you that there are some deep flaws with our institutions, and how do I go about doing that? And so that's part of what this show is about, is like, okay, how do I have constructive conversations? Because ultimately, if I can't persuade a normie towards my perspective, in my view, government's just going to continue to grow, and these structural issues, the foundations of these structures, which I would argue were built on plunder and conquest, are going to eventually collapse under their own weight and crush a lot of people with them. And so how do we go forward? So that's kind of what I want to do. But maybe what we could do is start with just kind of looking at some events that have been in the news this past week, John, and go from there. Or is there another place maybe you want to start?
No, I like it. Let's, what do you got for headlines? And we'll see if we can relate on something that, maybe I'm not a news junkie. So maybe we'll find something we both know a bit about, or at least I know a bit about, and we can get started.
Okay, I'm going to show you this first clip. Now, this first clip is a guy named Chris Sky. Have you ever heard of Chris Sky?
Nope, I don't know Chris Sky.
Of course not. You're a normie. You wouldn't know who Chris Sky is.
Sky. Wait, which extreme party is he part of?
Well, I don't know what he's his own character. He's okay. I don't know how you would describe him, but he became a bit of a celebrity with the in his opposition to the COVID regime, let's say.
Okay.
And he's a muscle bound, short little guy, very muscly, always wearing tank tops, very tattooed, he's got neck tattoos, very loud and aggressive and outspoken, and has gathered quite a bit of following, and kind of does civil disobedience, encourages people to be peacefully non-compliant, let's say, and civilly disobedient when it comes to COVID policies. Picked up quite a following. But I'm going to play a clip of him. He was recently in Edmonton. I think he's from Toronto originally. And here he is confronting an Edmonton city planner about 15-minute cities. And so let's see if I can share the screen. Let me know if you can hear this. Let's see. Hold on. Let me find the tab. Here we go. All right.
Yep, I can see the screen.
You can see that? Okay. Now let me know if you can hear the audio here.
What's the point?
Can you hear that?
Yes, I can.
Okay. All right, let's play it. I might stop it at a couple points just to make a comment, but
okay.
What's the point? I'll answer that question. Do you actually want an answer to that question? Sure. Okay, we have neighborhoods right now. The city right now is divided into about 400 neighborhoods. Has anyone, it's been that true for I don't know. As long as Edmonton has existed, has anyone tried to confine you to your neighborhood? No.
But they never called it a district.
They never called
That-
it
that
a
is-
15-minute city.
That is true. So
They did during lockdowns.
neighborhoods exist, and all during COVID, I
Wait.
came and went.
Okay,
out.
wait,
Hold on,
I'm
no, I'm
gonna
answering your
cut
question.
you off for a second.
I'm going to answer your
Because
question.
you said we were
You
never
wanted me to
confined-
answer your question.
Shortstop. You said we were never confined to our neighborhood, but they certainly tried under COVID.
Yeah.
And let's just pretend for a second we go along with the 15-minute city plan, and now we have these wonderful districts. How much easier would it be for them to literally lock us down into a little tiny 1.5 square kilometers?
There's going to be a stipulation in this policy that says, look, we will never have barricades here.
No, we didn't consider that because
They did not
We didn't
consider
consider
that.
that because that's the exact plan that we have considered.
because
You got the mic.
in fact, there's infinite things that the plans will not do. We're not going to neuter your chinchilla, for example. We're not going to come
But
and
that's
give you
not
a
something that's
haircut.
going to come in our mind.
No, hold on. But listen.
ridiculous they are.
Yeah,
What I'm
that's-
saying is,
He said, "Come in our minds." Sorry, that was kind of juvenile, but
I'm really enjoying this so far. It's
all right,
I can see where it's heading.
all right, here we go.
An
That's
honest
not a good
question.
argument.
there are
You're asking a
many
question
things that
of,
you can
excuse
imagine that could happen.
No,
So
that's not something that we can
anything that you
imagine. That's something that they're doing already.
It is
It's happening right now. We're not imagining it. So stop lying.
Yeah.
It's happening right now
We're not
in
imagining
Oxford,
it. We're not
England.
imagining it.
So they're doing it there.
I
Why
understand that
wouldn't
you're
they?
very concerned.
Excuse
I'm
me.
trying to answer his question.
But you're
you have
not.
to wait your
You're
turn.
lying.
Let him
You have to wait your turn. Sorry. I know what's in the plans because I am writing the plans. I work with the team that's creating the plans. There isn't material in. There isn't. I work for the city of Edmonton, and I.
All right, let me just.
Well, that was entertaining to watch.
Yeah. Okay. So, what are your initial reactions? Who are you siding with, Chris Sky or the city planner?
Oh, I hope it shouldn't come across as completely obvious, but I am totally siding with the rational and calm city planner
Right.
who is continually being like overtaken only by volume and force by, I think you said his name is Chris Sky,
Yeah.
and Chris Sky promotes civil disobedience, but that wasn't, I mean, other than not using violence, what was civil about that? I mean, he's
Right.
he's vulgar, he's derogatory, he's not letting the city planner respond. And I think there's a good conversation to be had there, but not in that context.
Right. And so, listen, audience, are you hearing what John F. the Normie has to say here? That approach that Chris is using there may certainly appeal to his followers, but the lion's share of the people out there, the normies, the normal people of this world will look at that and be like, "Oh, that city planner is," and the city planner even got some nice little jabs in too. Like he said, "Wow, you know, we don't plan to neuter your chinchillas. So do you want us to put that in the plan that we will, you know, refuse to neuter your chinchillas or something?" I mean, it's not part of our plan to restrict your travel, to neuter your chinchillas. Like there's infinite things that we don't plan to do. And we can't literally name every one of these things. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But I mean, the broader point here is, you know, when I saw this, and I'm generally pretty, you know, like I'm not a big fan of 15-minute cities. I do think that there might be some danger involved with them. I'm a little skeptical of them. You know, don't get me wrong, I like the idea of having most amenities within a 15-minute walk. But, you know, when I look and see what they've done in the UK with some of these 15-minute cities where they've actually put up barricades and restricted how many times people can drive their car out of their neighborhood without paying a fine or a fee to do so, you know, it concerns me a little bit. And while there's no plans now, and the city planner could say, "Well, of course we don't have any plans. You know, my job here as a city planner is just to make things a little nicer for you guys, make it a little bit more convenient, make neighborhoods a little bit more attractive. I certainly have no plans to restrict your driving." You know, one could see where there might be a slippery slope, or where now that we have districts and our stated goal is to decrease traffic, Edmonton's stated goal is to decrease traffic by 50% or decrease. And part of that has to do with carbon emissions, or actually, I think a big chunk of it has to do with carbon emissions, according to news reports. Well, if you believe that government has the right to restrict travel by force, then you could see how eventually city officials might make it a mandate to actually restrict traffic, or use enforcement methods to limit how often people are able to drive their vehicles out of their neighborhood or something like that. But none of that is brought up in a kind of rational way. It's just this shouting over each other.
And like, second to that, well, you're right. Like, I mean, their form of discourse was really poor because they weren't actually talking. They were just yelling at each other. And I mean, I also don't love some of the extreme ideas. I mean, what Edmonton is proposing, and I've read it a bit I'm no expert on it, but from a normie point of view, I've done my due diligence and I've looked at what the city plans are and how they're trying to develop it. It's like, they're not talking about locking anybody down. And to take this extreme view that, oh, well, it's happening somewhere in the world. Like, did you know in this one place in the world, and, don't quote me, maybe I'm wrong, maybe there's 5 places in the world, but just because it's happening somewhere, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen here. It's almost like a future anxiety that you have, like, oh my gosh, like, well, what if they do that? It's like, well, yeah, but they're not doing that. I mean, there's crazy things happening all over the world. Let's look at what's happening right here, and let's talk about what they're actually planning. And the thing is, the 15-minute plan, I mean, I live in a community I hardly ever leave it myself. I mean, I have a vehicle, but I love the fact that I have a Costco close to my house and a Superstore close to my house and a hospital in my neighborhood and my work's here. It's fantastic. Not for any other reason than it's convenient for me.
I mean, it would be even more convenient if we just shrunk that down to like a 5-second world, like, get me into a matrix pod, feed me with IVs, give all my entertainment and consumption through a neural network jacked into my cerebral cortex.
Here's a funny thing, Tim. I was, we initially talked about having this podcast, and I was going to drive to your location.
Right.
But you know what you did? You sent me a link because it's actually easier for me to stay in my house and you to stay in your house. So we're actually currently hooked into what you just made. You kind of made a matrix joke in the sense that, wouldn't that be easier? Well, guess what? It is easier. I didn't have to drive for 15 or 20 minutes, outside of my district, because I could do it from the comfort of my own house. So sometimes it just makes sense. I don't have to be all concerned that, oh, well, you know what, with the rise of the internet and with the rise of, podcasting platforms, I'll never be allowed to leave my house to have a face-to-face conversation again. No, I'm not going to make that that scare tactic. I'm just saying, oh, that would be convenient. And sometimes I do want to see a guy face-to-face and have a conversation.
Right. And so let's, and honestly, I don't know very much about 15-minute cities, right? I've just, have some, have heard some general things. So I want to have someone on here to hear what their real beef is with 15-minute cities. I actually made a meme that said, to hell with 15-minute cities. I want 15-minute countries. We have way too many countries in this world. I want to be able to walk, across the neighborhood, knock on my prime minister or king's or president's door and say, hey, what the fuck, dude? Why you have this policy? Like, change it. But let me try to make the case, as far as I know it, for the other side, the most reasoned case. First of all, where does the name 15-minute cities come from? Well, I suspect it comes from some place like the World Economic Forum or the UN Sustainable Development Committee, or one of these global kind of cabals that is trying to implement a standard, let's say, for the world in terms of sustainability going forward. And you remember for a long time there all these different governments in the world were using the term "build back better," right? As if to say, look, what we need, in the World Economic Forum put it out, Klaus Schwab, we need a great reset. Like, the climate catastrophe is a huge thing. This is the biggest thing on a progressive's mind right now in terms of what scares them. And so they have all these different initiatives, let's say, to try to curb that. And so they send out these kind of global initiatives, and they try to bring, and they address them to municipalities, try to sell them to municipalities. And one of those initiatives is 15-minute cities, wherein carbon emissions are curtailed by, from a, let's say, a less clandestine way or less nefarious way, by just making things more convenient for people to walk to, right? So that they don't have to drive, so that they naturally choose to walk or ride their bike rather than drive, because it's just easier.
Yeah.
Or in more, let's say, nefarious ways, actually physically block people from driving by imposing punishments on them if they do drive, like actively taking their money or, enforcing actions against them. So that I think is the worry from a lot of these people, is that, look, they're adopting this 15-minute city plan, which was put out by a global thing with a worldwide global development. It's not, they're trying to implement this worldwide, and it's expressly for the idea of eliminating carbon, even though they're selling it to you as it's more convenient. What their real agenda is decreasing CO2 emission, and decreasing CO2 emissions is, it can be seen as anti-human, because we, in order to live and survive and flourish, we emit carbon dioxide, and limiting that means we can't use as much energy and we can't flourish and that sort of thing. So that is, I think, the best case against 15-minute cities that I can make right now. I don't know if there's more to it. Like I said, in the future, I'd like to have someone on to talk about what really is the strongest case for and against them. But what are your thoughts when you hear that argument?
Well, I'm still just hearing, I mean, your initial approach was whoever the governing body is, to push and sell the ideas to municipalities. They're trying to sell it as though it's more efficient. It's more efficient for people. And then you're saying kind of the negative undercurrent is that they may start enforcing it, and they may start, actually, again, just forcing people not to do it. But my first thought, sorry, one more thought here. My first thought is that, like, I'm a business owner, and I have some, businesses in different geographical locations, but I purposely put my businesses within a certain distance of my own residence, strictly because I want efficiency.
Sure.
I want to be able to commute, only 10 minutes to get to one of the locations where I do business. And it's like, I don't understand why people wouldn't want that. And why would we expect
of course they would.
Why would we expect that they're going to start to put ticketing people? And I understand it's happened one place in the world, but don't use one scenario and try and blanket everything with that.
But John, in fairness, it's not just happening in one place, right? I mean, they have a carbon tax. They're literally extorting money from people for emitting carbon dioxide. Now,
so hold on.
The free market solution would be just what you said. It's like, look, markets tend towards efficiency, right? People don't want to use more energy than they have to. And so, if you design a city where they don't need to use more energy to get everything they need, that's great. If you
design that what they're doing? Isn't that what they're doing?
Sure. That's what they're doing. Yeah. That's part of what they're doing. The worry is that they're going to do what all governments seem to have no problem doing, which is actually limiting, through the use of force or through extortion or something like that, the amount of CO2 that you can emit. So they seem to have no problem doing that, right? I mean, the carbon tax does that. Things like cap and trade. We see governments everywhere using the force of government to try to curtail carbon emissions, CO2 emissions through punitive force. That's a fair statement, isn't it?
Well, I want to agree with the part that the government is trying to reduce the carbon footprint with,
Right.
things like carbon taxes. I'm not going to agree with the part about the punitive force. You and I have.
Well, carbon taxes, that's what they are. They're Pigouvian tax, right? They punish people for emitting CO2. And that's how they incentivize people not to emit CO2, right?
I'll call it a tax. I know sometimes, we often argue about just the definition of, how extreme we want to call it, but they tax it. So they try and disincentivize, driving your car more or having a larger house because, that's going to, the disincentive is going to cost you more to do that.
Right. Right. And of course, the negative downstream effects is that it makes everything a little bit more expensive because everything has energy inputs. And these put the most marginalized people, the poor people, at risk more than it puts wealthy people who can, afford to pay the fine for emitting CO2. And so they can fly their private jets to Davos and scream about the climate catastrophe that's coming. They can Instagram from their private yachts about how bad the climate's getting, and they'll pay the premium for that, and they can afford to. But the people living on the margins can't afford to, and they're already paying inflationary prices for food. You add on that, taxes. It increases the cost of energy, and people naturally want to do what you're doing, which is go towards more efficiency using less energy because it's cheaper. But now they're actually paying fines essentially for emitting energy. That's a little bit of a different scenario.
I mean, I agree. They're adding the taxes, and I don't know if I agree totally with the idea that, it only affects the people on the margins the worst, because at some levels, I mean, part of it I do agree with, but part of it I don't. People who live on the margins are also sometimes not driving the big F350, so they're actually not being affected as much. They might be driving already a Toyota Corolla because they've had to find some efficiencies, and they're, people on the margins are living in a 1-bedroom apartment, which their power consumption is considerably lower.
Yeah, but the cost of all the goods and services that they consume, from medicine to food to you name it, all of those things presumably get shipped or trucked or different things like that.
They do.
And so, I mean,
but is that really the argument that we're making here? I mean, as much as I tend to agree with that, I don't know if Chris is yelling at the city planner because he's a humanitarian trying to save, the single parents out there who are really struggling. I mean, look,
in his mind, if you go to his Twitter bio, he bills himself as a human rights advocate. So I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to assume he has good intentions here and that he's trying to
let's put me out as an astronaut too. Put that on my resume. Sure. If we're allowed to just call ourselves anything we want.
All right. Yeah. I mean, look, I don't know. Let's assume, I try to assume people have good faith, even if they behave badly in my estimation, but that is the concern from guys like Bjorn Lomborg, for example, who has been looking at this climate crisis for years and accepts all the IOPC reports that yes, the world is warming, but no climate catastrophe on the list of things, of crises that are facing the world, is pretty low down there. And he makes the argument that, look, what you're doing right now is committing to killing millions of people who are on the margins, especially in developing countries, in order to stave off an imaginary disaster in the future. So you're going to create a disaster right now to stave off. So that's the argument against these.
Are developing is India? I'm calling India a developing country. That's why I would reference it. There's a lot of poverty there. Is India talking about making 15-minute cities, or are we talking about Canada right now, or Europe? Those aren't. I mean, when we talk about people on the margins, we do have levels of poverty in those countries, but the levels are considerably different. I don't know if the level of people dying of starvation is quite as high. And at the same time, if the government's going to implement things like carbon taxes, well, shouldn't they also be coming up with some potential solutions to actually help our societies get towards, so we can actually achieve these lower carbon footprints? And this just seems like, from their point of view, because they've always had city planning. I mean, I'm no expert in this, but I would assume Edmonton's had city planners for the last 50 plus years. Well, they kind of have a responsibility to set this up anyways. I mean, they set up roadways to be efficient. They set up, like they have bridges in good geographical locations that make sense. So
sure.
Why is this any different?
Well, and I guess you're right. And that's kind of my point here, right? Is that, why shouldn't the government implement this, make things more efficient? And by the way, why shouldn't they implement some kind of fee for the extra carbon dioxide you produce in the city by needlessly leaving your neighborhood or something like that, right? Why wouldn't they do that? Why that would make sense. That's well within the government's purview. I mean, they have a tax on carbon dioxide. So, to me, it doesn't sound like it would be that hard a sell to limit, to use some kind of force or fine or punitive fee or tax or whatever you want to call it, to limit movement out of neighborhoods. It doesn't sound like it would be that hard to sell to someone like you. Would that be fair?
You know what? I suppose I'll take that stance. I will take the stance, I guess, since I'm going to be sitting in this role, that it wouldn't be that hard of a sell. And the thing is, with all economies and with all industries, although there's, let's say, for example, driving a car. Yeah, there's a lot of positives of driving a car. People get around a lot quicker. They can move large, heavy payloads as opposed to walking or riding a bike. But there's also like the negative externality, and the negative externality being the unintended consequences to people around us. So, for me, being in the Normie, and this, I don't know how this will register with your viewership, but sometimes I get really frustrated seeing the big F-350 that's been chipped out, and every time they step on their gas pedal, a plume of smoke comes billowing out of it. I think for some people, they get a hard on from that. For me, I just see it as like, it's just a bit of a frustration for me, because I guess I don't have to compensate in that regard.
Well, how do you feel about truck nuts, though? I mean, surely
the thing is with truck nuts is there's no negative externality, because I'm not having a plume of smoke that's being blown into my car by the truck nuts. Yeah, I might have to look at it and it's slightly unpleasant, but it doesn't have any unintended health consequences for me.
Sure.
So, I mean, sometimes if we have more efficient ways of doing things, just like I don't like littering, if somebody drives down my street and they litter, and I'm like, well, that's brutal, because now my neighborhood's becoming a lot more dirty and I have to go be the one to either look at it every day, or also I have to go out and pick up all this litter on the street. Well, I don't mind the fact that there's a litter tax and it's known as a fine. To me, that makes sense, because it's good for, I don't want somebody else's bad habits or lack of community caring to impact me. So again, on this one topic, I don't mind, like, the carbon tax affects other people slightly more than me, because I drive a somewhat fuel efficient car. Don't worry, people, I'm not driving a Prius, but at the same time, I don't drive I don't have a big holiday trailer to pull around, so I don't need a big truck.
Fair enough. Okay, let's move on from this subject. I think we've kind of beat it to death as much as we can.
Okay.
Let's see what else is on my agenda here. We could talk about balloons and UFOs. Oh, you know what? Here, let's talk about here's something that you and I might have at least a little bit of expertise on, and that is the train derailment in Ohio. And I don't mean that we have an expertise in train derailments, but we're both firefighters. I'm a hazmat technician. And so we could talk a little bit about what they did in Ohio and what's going on there, and see if we can make some sense of it. So my understanding is this train carrying vinyl chloride derailed. A bunch of rail cars came off the track. There was, I can't remember how many train cars full of vinyl chloride in these pressurized containers. And from what I read, the fire department there noticed that one of the containers was heating up. And so they decided to offload the vinyl chloride from these rail cars into a trench that they had dug kind of beside the tracks to try to contain the product. And then they lit it on fire, and you saw these, apocalyptic looking fireballs and plumes of smoke and all this stuff kind of drifting northwards towards Canada. What is your take on, let's just talk about the tactics they used there. I imagine they were worried about a BLEVE going on, right? And for folks at home that aren't in the fire service, the BLEVE is a boiling liquid expanding vapor explosion. Most vinyl chloride boils at, I think, minus 14 degrees Celsius or something like that. So if it warms up above minus 14 Celsius, it immediately becomes gas, essentially. And so in order to transport these things in cars, they have to pressurize them and pressurize them down to liquid form. And the danger is, if these pressurized containers heat up, though, that product can start to boil and expand, and next thing you know, you've got a giant bomb on your hand. And vinyl chloride is apparently very flammable and explosive, and so they were worried about these rail cars exploding, and I imagine that's why they offloaded the product. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, do you have any specific questions on it? I mean, that's kind of I'm with you. I mean, their tactic was to dig a trench, and I would hope that they took the safest approach, and the approach that's going to have the lowest impact to human life, because for a lot of reasons, just because ethically and morally that's the right thing to do, but also like liability wise, it's going to be the right thing to do. The train company or whoever was hauling the goods and services, who would be responsible, the responsible party, whether it's from an ethical standpoint or just from a legal standpoint, they don't want to end up killing anybody as a result of this train crash. So, I mean, I think we'd have to keep discussing it more, to debate it.
Yeah, I guess, initially I saw some people wondering why they burned this stuff and put it up into the atmosphere, right? So do you have any speculation as to why they did a controlled burn? Why would they light the stuff on fire?
Yeah, sure I do. Do you like stuff? Do you like plastics? I look behind you, you have furniture, and I'm sure there's some petroleum products that goes into everything in a house nowadays. And
for sure,
these chemicals are what we need to make products. I don't know specifically what that chemical makes, but living in Strathcona County, we have an enormous amount of chemicals moving around, but that's what makes the world. So the thing is, if we like stuff and all of us appreciate our modern standard of living, well, sometimes we need to have these chemicals that get shipped around to different factories in order to enjoy our quality of life. But sometimes there's going to be accidents. And I mean, obviously that's a problem, that there was a train derailment. I don't know what the cause of it was, but inevitably, like no matter what you do, there's going to be these events, these emergencies that occur. So when it occurs, yeah, you have to just do the best you can at the scenario. And oftentimes you're faced with what's the worst of all these options, or sorry,
right.
what's the least worst? What's the least worst? Like no, there's no option that's the best, because a BLEVE is obviously not that good, because it could certainly take human lives in the short term. Like it could kill somebody immediately. Now, I know burning it and putting it in the atmosphere has a lot of consequences too, especially there may be longer term effects. But when looking at the two options, if I was only faced with those two options, I don't know what I would do, but I could see them potentially, like with their thought process of just burning it off and hoping that it disperses into the atmosphere and it doesn't kill anybody.
Well, yeah. And that was kind of my take on it too, was like, okay, they've got them in these trenches. The trenches probably aren't lined because they wouldn't have time to line these things with plastic. So this stuff, you've got all this product that's toxic. sitting in a trench, seeping into the ground and eventually getting into groundwater. You've got, tens of thousands of liters of this stuff just waiting to get into streams. So they probably said, okay, the least worst option is to light it on fire. That's going to create hydrogen chloride. So it creates, hydrochloric acid when it burns. That's one of the byproducts, but it's going to go up into the atmosphere. And one of the mantras of hazmat is the solution to pollution is dilution. If it goes up into the atmosphere, it'll eventually disperse and become weak enough that, it shouldn't harm anyone, the hydrochloric acid. But of course, there's other products in there. So now, the issue is we've got people being told, I guess, by the EPA and authorities there that it's safe to go home. And they're seeing obvious rainbow stuff laying at the bottom of groundwater. There's some kind of product in there. There's dead fishes popping up. One lady said that her 7 chickens died. She was like, I think 7 miles from the site or something like that. And no one seems to know what's causing this. There's a lingering smell. Some people complain of feeling sick, and yet they're being told it's safe. And of course, people are upset. They think the EPA is out to get them or something like that, or different things like that. My take on it is that these so-called experts simply don't know, right? They don't know the answer. They don't know what the chemicals are. This is an uncontrolled situation. They don't know what the repercussions are. They've got some monitors and some gas detectors, but these detectors can't possibly pick up every possible contaminant. So as far as the contaminants that they're testing for in the areas where people are living, there's nothing maybe showing up on their detectors on their analysis, but that's not to say that they know everything. So probably a little irresponsible to say it's safe to go home if that's what was said, but also it's like there's a lot of the problem I have with conspiracy theorists is that people think that there is a cabal of puppet masters out there kind of controlling the strings, that they're super geniuses or something, and but in my experience, that's just not the case. Most people are just like you and me, like we're idiots. We don't know what the right answer is. We don't know exactly what's going on. We can't see all the variables.
That's the big one. We just don't have all the details in front of us.
Right. And especially in a situation like this where, you're the incident commander. I mean, I can imagine it probably took hours to figure out exactly what he was dealing with. He probably figured out vinyl chloride right away, but, trying to figure out and get answers about what's the best option to go forward here. What's the chance of blovey versus what's this thing going to do in groundwater versus what's it going to do burning versus what are all the other chemicals? I mean, you're operating in a fog of war essentially. And that's true of every single person along the line, from the normal Joe Blow citizen in the town to, the train conductor who's never derailed a train before and doesn't know what's going to happen, to the railroad company owner, to, the EPA people who are like, like might be their first day on the job, or like, might have only been working there a few months, dealing with this totally unprecedented, kind of unexpected in terms of so these people, the general public thinks that there are experts out there that have all the answers. And the truth is that there is no expert. And that might be more scary than the idea that there are puppet masters out there who are controlling everything and know exactly what's going on and plan this derailment or something like that. And
I couldn't agree with you more, Tim. I mean, like when I was, when you're a kid, you look at, say a prime minister or a president, you think that, well, they're the president, they must know so much. But, like look at our country, do we expect that our prime minister knows everything? Yeah. Well, for real though, like put your hatred aside or your hard thoughts aside, but like he rose to a power of authority, but does his authority make him all knowing? Well, absolutely not. Well, you also talked about an incident commander. It's whether it's the fire chief or whether it's the police chief or whether it's the head of the train company, whoever takes incident command of this. you know, they're just a human being too. And I mean, yeah, you're right. Like, I'm sorry to tell the audience, but you know, there's no one person that just knows everything. And the person who thinks they know everything, they might be the, you know, my biggest fear of all, because they're so dumb that they don't even know what they don't know. And,
right.
And a lot of this information, you know, I have such a hard time with it. You know, oh, a lady showed up and her 7 chickens were dead. It's like, well, holy smokes. Like, okay, like that does sound fairly bad. But then, you know, the questions come up like, well, how long were you gone for? Like, did you not feed these things, or, you know, did you leave them?
Well, yeah, I know. I was my initial thing too, but then they released some footage from her home security camera showing that the chickens were alive and walking around and zipping around like an hour or two before the derailment or something. So it does seem like something.
And they could have died. The thing is, they truly, there could have been an exposure in the air and they died. And the thing is, you know, when the winds shift, a lot of it depends on when the winds are, you know, the direction the wind's going, where those toxic fumes are going. Maybe they did die. But when the incident commander and the city, you know, the city personnel who are going around monitoring the air, well, when they go to her neighborhood and they monitor the air and it shows up as being 0 parts per million of XYZ chemical that will kill you. Like, if the monitors are showing nothing, well, what do you want them to do at that point? If you told her, if you told the same person, oh no, we have no reason to believe that your house is harmful as far as pollution goes, but we still don't want you to go there. Well, you're going to have people freaking out. Like, you're going to have conspiracy theorists get upset about the, you know, the government for the exact opposite. It's like, I want to go to my house. It's my God-given right to be at my house. Like, well, shit, I can't make everybody happy in this scenario, can I? Right. Like, somebody's going to be mad. So, you know, especially here's the other scenario is they're burning it off. Well, initially they would have evacuated a massive area, or I'm sure they would have tried to evacuate a massive area. And that's the right thing to do. But as the time goes on, you know, you do have to try and get people back to their houses. And all we have at this point is air monitoring equipment. And if you, as the individual, don't feel like it's safe to go home, you're also not at gunpoint to go home. Right. So if she's uncomfortable, it's like, well, okay, then go stay at a family member's house until the plume burns off, or go grab a motel or grab your tent and go camping for the weekend. Like, I get it's not just that simple. You might have animals to look after, and you might have, you know, an elderly grandma that, you know, you can't go camping with, but life's tough. I mean, it's hard to make every situation just work perfectly for everybody.
Well, that's just it. And I mean, that's the message I really want to drive home here is that, look, people are not, they don't have all the answers. They may even have very few answers, especially in situations like this. I mean, don't trust that the authorities are going to be able to solve all your problems, that they're going to be able to identify all the potential hazards and the carcinogens and stuff. They're not that smart. They're just not that capable. And it's an unrealistic expectation. So don't imagine that the government is going to be the solution to the problem here.
Can I put a caveat on that too?
Sure.
I think also, although the government might not have all the answers, or the incident commander, I don't think Joe Blow has all the answers either.
For sure.
So when Joe Blow is, you know, raving about what he thinks is right, it's like, well, hold on. I mean, although the authorities don't know everything, we should probably listen to the experts in the field. Like, you know, Tim, you know more than the average person about hazmat, because you're a hazmat technician. It doesn't mean everything you say is perfectly perfect every time, but for somebody who knows nothing about it, they should at least take the time to listen to your opinions and how you came to your conclusion.
Yeah, well, and listen, here's my advice for residents of East Palestine. You know, be cautious. If you need to return home because you don't have any other choice, decontaminate your surfaces with water and soap if you can. You know, wear a mask, an N95 at very least, or ideally even better respiratory protection. You know, take some samples if you can, brush off the surfaces, keep it in little baggies for future analysis to you know, maybe one day they'll figure out exactly what kind of contaminants there are and that sort of thing. So, you know, but ultimately take some personal responsibility here and you know, use exercise judgment, and don't imagine that the government's going to have all the answers. And, you know, part of the issue too is that, you know, people are being told, from what I understand, that it's safe to go home. Well, I'm not sure that's, I don't know how you get that, how you can responsibly say that. You don't know what you don't know, you know, but anyways.
Well, you know, I just want to ask you this, you know, you live in a city and I live in a city. They both have a lot of refineries around them. Have you ever got up in the morning and walked outside and smelt some, you know, some byproducts of the refining process? Yeah. Well, how do I know that that's not going to kill me either?
Sure.
And again, it's like, you don't know what you don't know, but that goes for every single day.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it's like, if you don't feel that comfortable, you know, I mean, some people don't feel comfortable even living in the city I live in. So they live at an acreage or on a farm, you know, outside of town. But, you know, we do have air monitoring that happens, and it's at least something. And other than that, you know, sometimes you just got to go on with your life. And yeah, you're right. Like, take some precautions here and there, but, you know,
yeah,
eventually that plume of smoke's going to be gone. I mean, that's nice. It's a self-limiting problem. And then when it's gone, if you were feeling uneasy before, you can move in when it's burnt up.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And I mean, in terms of the causes of this accident, you know, I've heard everything from, there's been some deregulation blamed. Trump apparently did some kind of deregulation about electric brakes or something like that going through.
He probably got forced by the libertarians.
Probably. Yeah, we want to deregulate everything, but that's actually a bit of a misnomer. We want regulation to abide in the appropriate authority, and so in this case, the appropriate authority would be something like the town or the property owners of, you know, the people that have the most at stake when there's hazardous materials going through their community. But what I suspect has happened is that ability to be that authority on stuff going through the community has been outsourced or stripped of them and given to either the federal government or the state government. You know, they for example will use expropriation measure to basically take land to punch a railroad through. That's called crony capitalism, and now they're abiding by whatever federal or state standards rather than the municipal standards that otherwise might come into play. So if I were the owner of a city or entrusted with stewarding a city by virtue of being a mayor or something like that, I would want to make sure that any hazardous goods that came through my property would, you know, that there were certain precautions taken, that it was coming through slowly, that they were meeting certain safety standards, that the infrastructure was up to snuff, that they maintained it. I'd want them maybe to have multi-million-dollar funds in escrow, so that if they ever did violate their contract with me in any way by not keeping things up to snuff, or God forbid having an accident because of negligence on their part, that money could then be used for reparations and repairing the damage they did, different things like that. So I mean, that would be highly regulated, but it would be regulated by the correct by the property owner, let's say.
Can I argue with you on this, Tim?
Sure, of course you can. That's why I brought you on here.
Well, I know. I just say I'm scared. I'm gonna, you know, maybe beat you at this one here.
Oh boy.
Okay, you know, so with that idea that we want to leave it up to, you know, each municipality. So we have, you know, we're talking about railroads in this particular instance because that's what happened. It was a rail car crash. That's going through how many municipalities? You know, they're transcontinental. They go all the way across the entire North America. They're going through 1,000 different municipalities, and we're saying we want to leave it to each municipality to determine what kind of regulations. Now, hold on. Now you just said, you know, if you were the mayor. So now, like, let's pretend I'm the mayor of one of these, but I'm going to act as one of the woke activists, you know. So I'm really anti everything.
Sure.
As far as, like, you know, carbon goes. Well, why wouldn't I just make my restrictions so unrealistically high that the train now can't even go through it. Now we have a railroad that's in the country's best interest. It's in, each individual benefits from a railroad because it reduces the cost of goods transported per mile.
Right. We're getting into a big subject here. And we're coming up on, I wonder if we should maybe save it for another time, because
Sure.
what we're talking, because I mean, I've moved to an example that's a little bit easier to wrap our heads around, that doesn't have as many complexities and moving pieces. And that's just simply, I'm a farmer that owns a land and they want to punch a pipeline through. And I want to make sure that certain safety precautions are taken, but they just go ahead and expropriate my land because it's for the greater good, and punch that pipeline through or something like that. That is, the example I would use. But we'll save this for, we've just hit an hour, John, and guys, I want you to join me in thanking John the Normie for coming into the Lion's Den here and having a productive debate with me. I have a feeling this is not going to be the last we see of John. We just got to hit the tip of the iceberg on all the things that we could argue about, all the things we could go down. I'm determined at some point in the history of this show, we're going to get some movement on John the Normie. He's going to come over to my side.
I'm pulling you back too. I'm going to pull you.
Maybe you'll pull me back from the fringes.
You might identify as a fringe.
Hey, you know what? I would love to become
I'd
love to become a normie again. I would love that. It would be so much less of a hassle. I would, my career wouldn't be in jeopardy. All these different things. So maybe you'll pull me over to the other side. But listen, guys. Once again, please join me at locals.com. Go to locals.com and search for Tim Moen or Tim Moen Talks, and become part of the conversation. If you enjoy conversations like this, if you want to see more John the Normie on my show, please throw me a cup of coffee, $5 on Locals. It's Dave Rubin's platform. It's all about free speech. And we'll keep this going, and I'll be able to expand this show, bring you more great content, bring you more great guests. And I won't have to work so much overtime for this bloody socialist healthcare system that's fallen apart. I'm tired of being the glue that's holding socialism together, guys. Help me out here. All right, John, thank you so much.
Thank you, Tim.
Guys, peace out.